Thank you, Amy. Very grateful for the opportunity to introduce these speakers to you. First of all, let me acknowledge the BYU Law School and the support that they give to the International Center for Law and Religion Studies. We're also grateful to the university administration for their belief in exactly this topic. What are the foundations of human flourishing? How does religious freedom contribute to it? What are the whys? I also want to acknowledge our co-sponsors, the Wheatley Institution, that pursues research in exactly these areas and help to craft and produce this fine program. We're going to proceed first with Professor Collis, and then with Tami Pyfer, and then Talmage Boston. But I'll introduce them in reverse. So when I'm finished, just come right up, Professor Collis. First, Talmage Boston. He's a partner in the Dallas office of Shackelford, McKinley, and Norton. He's been recognized on 3 different occasions as one of the top litigators in the state of Texas. He handles commercial litigation in both trials and appeals, and has been board certified in civil trial law since 1988 and civil appellate law since 1990 by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. During his 40-year career, he has successfully represented clients in state and federal court lawsuits and arbitrations involving oil and gas, real estate, banking, intellectual property, and partnership disputes. He has successfully tried many jury trials throughout Texas and prevailed in appellate courts all over the state, including the Texas Supreme Court and the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. So again, he'll be our concluding speaker of this panel. Tami Pyfer is the Chief External Affairs Officer for Unite, a national organization seeking to ease division across political and cultural differences. Tami is also the co-creator of the Dignity Index, an 8-point scale for measuring the dignity or contempt in the language we use with each other when we disagree. Tami leads the Dignity Index government, corporate, and state partnerships. Before her work with Unite, Tami served for 7 years as the education policy advisor to former Utah Governor Gary Herbert, where she was involved in state-level policy development, coalition building, and stakeholder engagement. She held local and state elected offices for 12 years, 8 years on the Logan City Council and 4 years on the Utah State Board of Education. Tami's professional training is in special education, and before her appointment to serve on the governor's executive team, she taught at Utah State University, preparing teachers to work with students with disabilities. Tami and her husband, Aaron, are the parents of 5 children, grandparents of 16. They live in Salt Lake City, Utah. Our first speaker will be Professor Stephen T. Collis. He researches and teaches on religion, law, productive discourse, and other First Amendment topics. He is the founding faculty director of the Bech-Loughlin First Amendment Center and its Law and Religion Clinic. Before joining Texas Law, he was a research fellow in the Constitutional Law Center at Stanford Law School. His scholarly work has been cited by the Supreme Court and published in various law reviews, as well as in his books. Professor Collis is the author of The Immortals, Praying with the Enemy, and Habits of a Peacemaker, which provides habits for developing the skill to engage in productive discourse about hard topics. The American Library Association has praised him as a much-needed voice of reason and compromise. Now I'm going to add just one thing. He and Jerusha, his wife, came in from Paris. I'd seen them the week before at Oxford, where Professor Collis was speaking. And now he sees me again here. And that's important because this has kind of sandwiched his anniversary with his wife. And I was like a frequently interrupting narrator, constantly disturbing the process of the anniversary celebrations. But we're delighted that they're here. And as I reflected and got to know them a little better over the course of this year, and then, of course, in England, it occurred to me, why religious freedom? And as I thought about them and their family, and they have 5 children, I thought about what this family means. And as I've gotten to know Steve better, he's always telling me, I've got to get home. He's telling his dean, I've got to get home. He's telling the president of the University of Texas at Austin, oh, I've got to go home. And as I've gotten to know what he's gotten home to, that family life, it occurs to me this is one of the key reasons why we have religious freedom, so that this little platoon, as Edmund Burke said, can worship their God, can follow the dictates of their conscience, can build out their family life, can have the kind of happiness that I sense exists in this wonderful family. And getting to know Jerusha, you can see that this is a true partnership between both of them, that they build together. And so that's given me an insight into precisely this question, why religious freedom? Professor Collis.
Well, as Paul said, we just flew in late last night from Paris, so I'm exhausted. And there's nothing more challenging than having to be the final speakers of the day when everyone's exhausted and tired already, and most of you can't stay awake. The good news is I've got a pounding headache, and because we flew in so late last night, who knows what I'm going to say. So hopefully it'll be entertaining. That's my goal for today. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so thankful for the ICLRS, BYU generally, Professor Kerry, Professor Sharf, Professor Clark, all of the students and faculty and others who have worked so hard to put this conference together. It genuinely is just a sincere pleasure and really inspiring to see so many wonderful people and like-minded friends working together trying to achieve religious freedom and peacemaking in our time. As Paul said, I'm a professor of the First Amendment. I spend my time speaking and researching and talking about First Amendment freedoms really all over the globe. You might think that the biggest problem with First Amendment freedoms and talking about them in this space is that they're so controversial, that there's controversial topics that spin off of them. But that's not the problem. That's not the major problem. The major problem is that most people have really strong feelings about the freedoms of the First Amendment, including religious freedom, and have absolutely no idea what they mean. That leads to lots of conflict. And I'll share a difference. I already shared a story at lunch about how I learned why we get in trouble in life when we think we understand something and we don't. For me, one of the problems I had when I was a young man is a story I often like to share. Today I'm going to share a story about my mother-in-law, because history tells us you can't get in trouble telling stories to a public audience about your mother-in-law. So when my wife was growing up, my mother-in-law was a fantastic cook. And every week, or roughly, she would cook pizza for the family. And one week, everyone sat down to eat the pizza, and it just tasted off. Didn't taste good. Nobody could figure out why. They were all eating it. But you don't tell mom that the pizza is disgusting. So everyone's choking it down. And then at some point, mom opened the door by saying, hey, does anyone else think the pizza tastes weird? And then everyone said, yeah, something's off. It tastes strange. And so she kind of thought about it for a second. And then her eyes got really big, and she said, everybody put the pizza down. And she ran into the kitchen. When she was cooking the pizza, she had gotten into this habit of she did it routinely, right, for a decade. She knew how to make pizza, wasn't even thinking. Turns out when she had picked up what she thought was the cooking oil to spray it on the pan, she had accidentally grabbed the bottle of Raid and had sprayed Raid all over the pizza pan and cooked the pizza with that. So she immediately called poison control. And when the guy was done laughing at her, he told her that she didn't need to worry about it, that they would be okay, just don't eat any more of the pizza. Right? A valuable lesson in life that we get in a lot of trouble when we don't understand something. Now that said, there are controversial topics that stem out of First Amendment freedoms, right? You've got the freedoms of religion, speech, and the press, the right to assemble and petition the government. From those stem all sorts of controversies about constitutional interpretation and abortion rights, LGBT plus rights, right? Protest rights, academic freedom. There's all sorts of complex issues that come out of this. And I end up talking about those all over the globe. And that leads me to really why I'm here. So I speak about those freedoms on a consistent and regular basis and the controversies that come out of them. I have conferences on a regular basis. Paul just mentioned I was just at Oxford University at a conference where I would guess that 95% of the faculty there have a completely different view of these freedoms than I do. We very much disagree with one another. And yet at each of these conferences, we always end up having productive conversations. We end up having productive discourse. And about 4 years ago, I started asking myself, what is it that we're doing? What are the habits that we're doing that are allowing us, those of us who are in this field, to have productive conversations about topics that usually send most people into arguments and fighting? And so I spent the last 4 years studying that, researching it, trying to figure out what the habits were that we were employing, and then distilling them down into a book that I could then pass on to anyone so they could use them in any area of their life. It doesn't have to just be talking about these types of controversies, but they could use these skills in their family lives, they could use them in their work lives, they could use them in their academic lives. And I came up with 10 really traits that peacemakers have. I don't have time now to get into those 10 traits, so what I'm going to focus on is just 2 that I think are especially problematic right now in our society. I want to emphasize that peacemaking is not about avoidance. I didn't go to Oxford and sit in a room with people for 2 days and just not talk about anything. We were expressing our opinions, we were exploring ideas, we were researching where we disagree and really probing one another. I'm not talking about avoidance, I'm talking about how to have productive conversations about very difficult topics. The 2 that I want to focus on that are a real problem in our society right now are 1, a lack of intellectual humility, and 2, a real problem with what I call toxic partisan loyalty, okay? So I'm going to talk about each of those. There's other habits we could explore, but those are the 2 I'm going to emphasize today. Let me talk about intellectual humility. One of the things I learned as I was doing this research is that most of the time, most of us, on most topics, have absolutely no clue what we're talking about, all right? As soon as we embrace that and come to understand it, the sooner we can realize how to have productive discourse about conversations. I went to law school at the University of Michigan Law School. It was modeled after University of Oxford, so if you go there, it's a beautiful quad, all stone in a Gothic style. And every single day at 5 p.m., I would go home to my family. That was the rule I made for myself. At 5 p.m., I would stop my studies, I'd go home to my family and have dinner with my wife and my children. And every day at 5 p.m., I'd walk underneath the door, and etched into the stones above that door was a saying from a poem by Alexander Pope. It said, "A little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not." I walked underneath that every single day when I left the law school. A little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not. It turns out that that's true. So there is research out there that talks about how, and it's from Elizabeth Dunning and a woman named Deborah Sanchez, that talks about how it turns out Alexander Pope was right. Most people, when they learn a little bit about a topic, leap to a supreme level of confidence, that they think they know everything about the topic, and then they get themselves in tremendous trouble, right? And think of the raid story, right? We get in trouble when we think we understand something and we don't. And unfortunately, this is a very common human tendency. We watch, say, one YouTube video, and we decide that we are now experts and can argue with anyone about everything under the sun because we watched this one video. The key here, the solution to try to overcome this, is recognizing how little we actually know about any given topic. And I'll just give you a couple examples of this. I am paid full-time and have been now for roughly 15 years to do nothing but sit around and think about and talk about and teach about First Amendment freedoms. That's all I do. And I would guess that I know roughly about 5% of what I think is out there that I would like to know about these different freedoms. As I start thinking about all the research now don't get me wrong, that 5% makes me an expert in the field, right? It's way more than what other people who don't spend time doing this know. But that 5% of what is available keeps me recognizing constantly how much more there is I could learn from everyone I talk with. There are so many books I will never have time to read, even if I were to do nothing but read books 24 hours a day till the day I die. There are so many articles out there I will never have time to read. There's so much comparative law analyses we could do by looking at how these freedoms have been treated in other countries. There's so much historical research we could do. There's so much empirical research we could do, scientific testing. Law professors are the best at coming up with tests with absolutely zero data to back them up, okay? There's so much research we could do to explore these freedoms and try to dig into them. The reality is I could never do it all by myself, and I know so little of what I would like to know. In my office, I often talk about how there are more books on the shelves than I will ever get to read. I love books. It's a problem. My children are going to have a huge problem when I die. Okay, I don't know what they're going to do with all the books. I'm always buying books. I always want to read them. I often do read parts of them, but there simply isn't enough time today to read them all. Researchers actually refer to a library like that you could never get to as an anti-library. And what it means, it actually serves a purpose, so much so that the Japanese actually have a term for this, which I can never pronounce and I'm not going to try. But they have a term that catches the concept of recognizing in an anti-library how much knowledge is out there that you do not have and will never be able to acquire, right? That type of humility about any given topic is critical. And so I want to do a little experiment with all of you. Let's to wake up and keep ourselves alert here. We're going to do something. First off, this audience, a lot of you are old enough to have seen that movie, Monty Python's The Holy Grail. Does anybody remember that? If you haven't, there's a scene where these people walk up and there's a big chasm, and this guy tells them, you've got to answer these questions, and if you answer, I'll let you go. If you don't, some magic force is going to cast you into the chasm. So pretend you're in that situation. You are going to live or die if you answer the question right, okay? And he tells you, now, without looking this up on your phone, he tells you that you must spell the word tariff properly, with the proper number of R's and the proper number of F's. My guess is there's some of you in here who could competently do that if you're an economist or something, but a lot of us are probably thinking, wow, if my life was on the line, I don't really know how many R's and F's are in the word tariff. I go online for 17 hours and argue with people over tariff policy, but I don't even know how to spell the word, right? Most of us probably have no idea. So let's do something together. Pick something in front of you. It could be on your lap, it could be a pen, it could be your phone, it could be your name tag that you have. Just pick something in front of you and take that object in. If you're looking at me, you're doing this wrong. Is everybody looking at an object? You have something? Okay, this is going to help you. You can engage in this habit at any time to remind yourself how little you know, right? Look at this object and start asking yourself some questions. What are all of the materials that this object is made of? How are the molecules in these particular materials working to make this product work? And why were those materials with their molecular structure picked for this particular product? Someone has a pen. Where was that pen manufactured? Why was it manufactured there instead of somewhere else? What are all of the economic regulations and legal regulations that went into making this pen work? Okay. How is the atmospheric pressure in the room affecting this particular object, and why does the atmospheric pressure not distort the object as it would with some other material? I could go on and on and on and on and on. I could give you millions of questions just about what's right in front of you. What you'll come to realize is you probably know about 0% of the object right in front of you of what you could know of what's available, right? A lot of us strut around this world going under something what scholars refer to as the knowledge illusion. We feel like we understand our world, but the reality is we actually don't know anything about what's happening around us. It's an illusion that we understand our world. Humanity has amassed an incredible amount of knowledge, but any one of us really has very little. As soon as we recognize that, engage in that habit whenever you start to get cocky about something and want to argue with people. Remind yourself how little you know. And then the key is to reframe conversations in light of your lack of knowledge. Instead of, when you do that, when you reframe conversations to recognize how little the participants in the conversation actually know about the topic, what you end up doing is becoming partners in trying to learn about and solve a problem, rather than becoming two people who are just defending entrenched positions that you took based on your gut reaction to something. Does that make sense? It changes the entire tone of the conversation when you just begin, when somebody comes in with a hot opinion on a topic and you just say, you know what, I don't know as much about that as I would like to. Can we talk about it a little bit more? I want to understand it better. It changes the entire tone of the conversation. The second habit I'd like to talk about is avoiding toxic partisan loyalty, which is something I see as a huge problem right now in our society. I do a lot of research into it in my book. Loyalty is not a problem. Being part of a tribe is actually a good thing. It's how humans get things done. Our last speaker spoke so eloquently about ants and everything that they accomplish, and human beings need to do the same. We have to be parts of teams and groups to get things done. It's when that being part of a team or a group becomes toxic, where we cannot, we are so loyal to the group and the idea of the group that we are not willing to stand for principle and stand for truth when those come to us. And we see this all the time in our political discourse right now. And let me just give you an example of two people who overcame this, and I can close with this example. Nadine Strawson and Kristen Wagner are two women that some of you have probably heard of, some of you have not, who could not be more different. Nadine Strawson is the former national president of the ACLU. Kristen Wagner is the current president of the Alliance Defending Freedom. Okay? On every hot-button issue I can think of in society, those two women disagree. But on one particular issue, they agreed. It had to do with free speech. So they wrote an op-ed together that they decided they wanted to get published. They sent it to every major newspaper in the United States. Not a single editor would publish it. Notice what's happening here. Nadine Strawson and Kristen Wagner both had the courage, based on principle, to break free from their political partisan loyalties to stand for a principle that mattered. The editors at all these major newspapers did not want to do that. They didn't like breaking with their tribes, and so they wouldn't publish it. Eventually, they got it published in Bloomberg Law, talking about the importance of freedom of speech and where it mattered. But they showed a moral courage there by doing that too many of us are not doing. Too many of us are afraid to stand for principle if it suggests we might be in conflict with whatever group we affiliate with. Peacemakers do not fall for that temptation. They stand for principle and for truth, even if that sometimes will put them at odds with their particular political groups that they're associated with. In fact, research shows that one of the defining characteristics of a true leader is the ability to show moral courage and stand for truth and principle, even if that means being at odds with one's current political tribe. Now, this is terrifying because sometimes it does mean we have to stand alone, and we feel alone. It's a terrifying step to do that. But I can promise from experience after experience after experience that if we do it, and if we are willing to do it, truth and principle will win out over partisan loyalty, and our society will be better for it. It's the mark of an effective leader, and we need far more effective leaders in our society. I'm so thankful for the opportunity to be here today. I'm grateful for this conference, for everyone that is here. We need more of you. And we need more of you in vast numbers across society to overcome the current polarization we're all facing. I'm so thankful for the opportunity to meet all of you, and I hope we can all go forward and help implement some of these principles in our lives. Thank you.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here today and talk about the Dignity Index. I have felt so many common threads through the messages that we've heard earlier today, and especially your call to action, Reverend. I to we, us, me to us. I'm not sure if I've got that right, but that is very much the work that we are doing with the Dignity Index. I will warn you, after spending maybe the next 12 minutes or so with me and learning about the index, you'll never see language or disagreement the same way again. Sorry, not sorry. Hopefully, that will be a success. So I want to talk just briefly about this thing that happened 5 months ago here on BYU campus. One of my church leaders, I belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and one of our leaders, Elder Gary Stevenson, spoke right here at BYU. And what a thrill it was for me to watch as he talked about the Dignity Index. His topic was peacemaking, and he made a connection that I hadn't really been making as clearly in the last couple of years as I wanted to. This is what he had to say.
So this index measures whether others are treated with dignity or contempt by the word that one speaks or writes in the public square. Its goal is to ease divisions, prevent violence, and solve problems, or, in other words, to nurture peacemakers.
So that was our goal when we started to develop the Dignity Index, was to ease division, prevent violence, and solve problems. And in other words, as he articulated, we want to be involved in peacemaking. Now, to set the context for my work on the Dignity Index, I've got to introduce you to my family. This is the Pyfer clan, most of us. We've added a few members since this picture was taken in the summer of 2021. We took a road trip to Montana together. This trip could not have happened in 2020, and it wasn't just because of COVID, or 2019 or 2018. Those years, even the year before, had become difficult for my family. And traveling together, even spending a Thanksgiving together as a family, was not at the top of anyone's bucket list. Let me show you why. In birth order, this is my family. My oldest son, Nate, is a Republican. My daughter, next in line, is an independent. This daughter is a Democrat. This son is a Democratic Socialist. And this son is a Libertarian. I have 5 adult children who align themselves with 5 different political parties. I call that a parenting win. You want your kids to grow up and find themselves, not just their vocation and their desires and their talents, but their political identities. I was an elected official for 12 years. My kids campaigned with me and for me. When I worked in the governor's office, we had lively debates. I'm a moderate Republican, and my husband is a conservative Republican. But as you can imagine, over the last several years, even though I felt this was a parenting win, it didn't feel like anyone was winning in my family. My family represents families all across the country. And the division is not just in politics, it's cultural and social divisions that are facing us. So in our work with the Dignity Index, we first looked at this through the lens of politics. And this is some data from the last couple of years. We believe that we're winning fights, but we are losing our country. And in some regards, we're losing our families and we're losing our communities. We're stuck. Only 4% of Americans think that America is working well. 1 in 3 Americans say that they've broken off a relationship due to politics, and half of those are with close family members. And we're split. About 83% of the country says that we are more divided than any time in their lifetime. We believe the problem is contempt. We honed in on this in 2020, early 2020, as we read the work of Dr. Arthur Brooks. In his book, Love Your Enemies, he talks about this cultural addiction to contempt that we have. That's an addiction that's fueled, abetted by the outrage industrial complex. That system that's around us that's getting us to hate each other. The clickbait, the social media, the talking heads, the podcasts. He said, if we want to solve the polarization problem, we have to solve the contempt problem. Our solution to contempt, and you're getting my condensed version of our project, our solution is dignity. While I was reading Arthur Brooks with my conservative Republican friends, my colleagues, Tom Roschert and Tim Shriver, were reading the book by Donna Hicks called Dignity. They're based in DC. I'm based here in Salt Lake City. Donna is an international conflict resolution specialist who worked in war-torn countries all over the globe for about 25 years. And she said that the number one tool she had at the negotiating table was dignity. And that if in dignity, or in our language, contempt tears us apart, dignity can put us back together. She says that dignity is this mutual recognition of the desire to be seen, to be heard, to be listened to and treated fairly. Think of those people that look at you and they know you. You know that saying when people say, I see you. That's dignity. She goes on to say that along with our survival instincts, the yearning to be treated with dignity is the most powerful motivating force in our behavior. She said it transcends race, religion, gender, every social distinction. It's the one universal truth about our experience. And then she goes on to say that if you violate someone's dignity, again, in our language, if you treat them with contempt repeatedly, you will get a war or a revolution or a divorce. Because a desire for revenge is an almost instant response to a dignity violation. I want to share just a few moments with my colleague, Tim Shriver, who is also a co-creator of the Dignity Index, talking about the language that we use in either offering dignity or contempt.
The way we talk to each other is sometimes hidden from us. We sometimes think we can convince someone of our point of view by humiliating them. And we don't stop to pause and say, wait a second, is that likely to work? Is it likely to be successful that by calling you names, by accusing you of horrible qualities, by humiliating you for your position, you're going to be won over? The answer is clearly no. Actually, what works to actually win people over, just practically speaking, is letting them be seen and heard and feel like their point of view matters too, even if you disagree with it. So we're not trying to tell people to suppress your point of view. We're trying to say that in the other is God-given, if I can use that language, dignity. Don't violate it. Don't attack in a way that is likely to make that person descend towards the same kind of acrimony and hatred.
So we share different faith traditions, Tim and I and Tom, and yet we share this very firm belief that everyone has inherent dignity, the fact that we are sharing this planet together. My religion addresses it differently, but we believe that we are all children of God and that we have this inherent worth and we have this inherent dignity. So in our shorthand in the workshops that I teach, we talk about contempt as this. It's a feeling of disdain or disgust for someone else. We label them, we avoid them, as Professor Collis said. We judge them. I see myself above you. When I start to see myself above you or better than you, or I avoid you, I don't engage with you because I know more than you do, that is contempt, and that separates us. Dignity, on the other hand, I don't see myself above you. I see myself in you. Because dignity is this inherent worth that we all have, we all share. This is when I am going to engage with you. Again, Professor Collis, we're curious, we're humble. I see myself in you. So the difficulty in promoting dignity is, how do I get better at something? If I can't measure it, if I can't identify or define it, how do I know if I'm getting better? If I believe that dignity brings us closer together when contempt tears us apart, how do I do that? I was watching this congressional hearing, and Representative Emmanuel Cleaver was talking about how congressmen are scored on everything they do, but no one scores them on how they treat each other, the language they use. So he said it's kind of easy to see that it's not that important. By the way, we met with Reverend Cleaver, and he is delightful. He gave us a blessing in his office, which was very meaningful to us. So we came up with the Dignity Index. The Dignity Index, you all have cards. And I'm going to run through this very quickly. You have cards that show you the scale. It goes from the bottom, which is a 1, to the top, which is an 8. It's not meant to score everything, but it's meant to score the language that we use when we disagree with each other, when we're angry, when we're hurt. I'm going to start at a 4 and walk you down. A 4 is that first step into contempt. We are better than those people. They don't belong. They're not one of us. 3, you're sinking down lower. We're the good people and they're the bad people. It's us versus them. And when you get to a 2, it's not only are we the good people and you're the bad people, but you're evil. And you're going to destroy everything if we let you. You're going to destroy the country if we let you. And 1 is when we start to dehumanize people. It's our moral duty to destroy them before they destroy us. I don't like that side of the scale. Let's jump up to a 5. This is the first step into dignity, when you can say, the other side has a right to be here. They have a right to be heard. They belong too. You do you. It's your country too. You belong in this organization as well. 6, this is when you start to look at these things, values and interests that you share, so that you can work together, so you can collaborate, you can come up with solutions to problems. 7 is when you look at the things you don't agree on, the values and interests you don't share. Because often, instead of looking for common ground at a 6, you start to look for higher ground, solutions to problems that you had not imagined before. And an 8 at the top of the scale. This is when you can recognize that everyone is born with inherent worth, and so we treat everyone with dignity no matter what. So this is how this works really quickly. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. The first quote here, this is a quote from John McCain, and we use these quotes when we train people to score. I've always believed that America offers opportunities to all who have the industry and will to seize it. Senator Obama believes that too. That would get you a 6. We share these values. By the way, he got booed when he said that during the campaign. I don't know how many of you remember that. How about this one? Just another useless Hollywood actor virtue signaling for attention at the expense of brave police officers around this country. Go back to your pampered life and let the heroes handle this. Obviously, on the contempt side, this is a 4. It's not calling them evil yet or saying that they're destroying everything, but it's definitely dipping into contempt. This one, we are the people who are obliged to take responsibility ourselves and wipe out this scum. Do not be afraid. Know that anyone whose neck you do not cut is the one who will cut your neck. This is clearly a 1. This is Leon Mugesera, who is serving a life sentence for his role in the Rwandan genocide. That's a 1. And then this one, this is Bishop Tutu. That will give this away. But he said, I've sat with condemned men on death row. I've spoken with former police officers who have admitted inflicting the cruelest torture. I have visited with child soldiers who have committed acts of nauseating depravity. And I have recognized in each of them a depth of humanity that was a mirror of my own. That's an 8. So this is one of the effects that we learned quickly on with the Dignity Index.
Is when you've spent some time with the index and you're not just using the index to look at somebody else. You're saying, how am I contributing to contempt? You hear something that you said or you receive contempt. Someone's on you, whether it's in an email or a social media post or in your comments, or they're saying it to you directly. And you're feeling the emotion of wanting to respond with contempt. But then in the back of your head, the Dignity Index is pushing you up the scale. It's saying, oh man, I want to be a 5, a 6, a 7. How do I respond to this in that way?
So the mirror effect is what makes this powerful. This is where you will not be able to see things the same way again. When you start to judge other people's language and you realize, oh my heck, that was me. That's the mirror effect. We believe that when we use contempt, it's hard to see it, but once we see it, it's hard to use. And we believe that the Dignity Index helps us see that contempt in our own language and helps us do better. So we ask people to learn the language of dignity. This is a scoring guide that we have on our website. And I want to wrap up quickly with this, these remarks of my other colleague, Tom Rochert, who helped develop the Dignity Index.
It is extremely hard to be in emotional pain and not try to find someone to blame. Your brain just goes there. But if I'm working with the Dignity Index and I'm looking at phrases that people use and I'm understanding the dignity and contempt in each, and I've trained myself to recognize words and phrases as signals of contempt, then when I see that happen, I draw back because contempt is so ugly. Can we get a grip on this? Can we see our own contempt? Can we see how toxic it is? Instead of trying to throw contempt on someone, can I pause? Can I understand that I'm in emotional pain? So yes, things are bad, but this is an opportunity for things to get better than they ever were.
So that's the work we're doing at the Dignity Index. On the back of your card, we've got just a real quick shorthand for ways that we can see things differently during a disagreement. I forgot I have these great quotes. We don't usually speak to audiences of faith-based traditions, but I often include these quotes anyway. This is the late Pope Francis. My wish is that the dialogue between us should help build bridges, connecting all people in such a way that everyone can see in the other not an enemy, not a rival, but a brother or sister to be welcomed and embraced. The late Rabbi Sachs, the greatest single antidote to violence is conversation, speaking out our fears, listening to the fears of others, and in that sharing of vulnerabilities, discovering a genesis of hope. And then my leader and prophet of our church, who gave this beautiful sermon last year, anger never persuades, hostility builds no one, contention never leads to inspired solutions. We can literally change the world, one person and one interaction at a time. How? By modeling how to manage honest differences of opinion with mutual respect and dignified dialogue. That's our goal, is to change the world, one person at a time. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. As we reach the home stretch of this highly inspirational conference, Paul's introduction of me was incomplete. I was not invited to speak at this conference because I've done a lot of great things as a lawyer in Texas. I wear two hats. My other hat is I'm a presidential historian. My book came out a year ago, How the Best Did It, Leadership Lessons from Our Top Presidents, which was endorsed by every major presidential historian in the country. And the remarks I'm about to give you come from the chapter devoted to Abraham Lincoln's greatness. So with our closing topic of peacemaking, dignity, and civility, I'd like to share my thoughts on those traits as they were demonstrated by our greatest president, Abraham Lincoln, in hopes that our awareness of his having those traits will inspire all of us to do a better job of incorporating them into our interpersonal repertoires. Now, when I say Lincoln is our greatest president, here's what I'm basing it on. The television network C-SPAN, every time one president leaves the White House and a new one comes in, conducts a presidential ranking poll, and the only people who get to vote in that poll are the country's 150 leading historians. And in every poll taken in the 21st century, Abraham Lincoln has been ranked #1. But more touching to me is the thoughts on Lincoln outside of the United States, his recognition around the world. And here's what the great Tolstoy, the Russian genius who wrote War and Peace, said of Lincoln, "Of all the great national heroes and statesmen in history, Lincoln is the only real giant. Alexander, Frederick the Great, Caesar, Napoleon, Gladstone, and even Washington stand in greatness of character, in depth of feeling, and in a certain moral power far behind Lincoln." He was a man whom a nation has a right to be proud of, a saint of humanity whose name will live thousands of years in the legends of future generations. That was Tolstoy's assessment of Lincoln. So when I say Abraham Lincoln is our greatest president, that's not me, Talmage Boston, talking. It's the conclusion of history's most esteemed scholars and thinkers. So now to the topic at hand. Peacemaking, dignity, and civility in general, and those traits in Lincoln in particular. Seems to me that if we wanted to merge all those traits into one, we could put them together and encapsulate in the word kindness. We hear the word kindness often, but we don't ask, why is it such a good thing for people in a civilized society to be kind? Well, here's how Lincoln answered that question. Kindness is the only service that will stand the storm of life and not wash out. It will wear well and be remembered long after the prism of politeness or the complexion of courtesy has faded away. Knowing Lincoln's thoughts on why kindness is so important certainly helps us understand why we should act that way toward others, but knowing how he, Lincoln, a real, flawed, flesh and blood human being, demonstrated kindness and peacemaking and maintaining his dignity and civility in so many ways to so many people in so many contexts throughout his 4-year and 1-month presidency is highly instructive. So the question, where did all these virtues come from in Lincoln? Answer, at their core, the traits came from having a spirit of magnanimity coupled with equanimity. Now that's a mouthful. 2 5-syllable words. What do they mean? Well, first, magnanimity. It comes from the Latin words that mean greatness of spirit. What does that mean? Greatness of spirit. It means being forgiving. It means turning the other cheek to an adversary. It means showing dignity and civility in order to make peace. It means not being resentful or vindictive. It means always taking the high road and never taking the bait from someone who's trying to set us off. Shakespeare described the greatness of spirit in one of his sonnets this way: "They that have the power to hurt and will do none." So that's magnanimity. What's equanimity? Equanimity also comes from the Latin, and it means even-tempered, level-headed, even when stressed. It means keeping yourself from being agitated. It means maintaining your dignity and civility. So now that we're clear on what magnanimity and equanimity mean, let's bring the coupling of those words to life by seeing how Abraham Lincoln modeled them in his kindness and his peacemaking and his staying in a steady mode of dignity and civility in real time with real people throughout his presidency during our country's darkest hours during the Civil War. Here's how Lincoln explained why he committed himself to these traits. Quote, "A man has not time to spend half his life in quarrels. If any man ceases to attack me, I never remember the past against him." Quote, "I shall do nothing in malice. What I deal with is too vast for malicious dealings." And finally, quote, "I have never willingly planted a thorn in any man's bosom." That's what Lincoln said. But here's what the people close to Lincoln said about his kindness, peacemaking, dignity, and civility. His friend Leonard Swett described him this way: he was a very poor hater. He never judged men by his like or dislike of them. The great philosopher poet of his era, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who closely followed Lincoln's career, said his heart was as great as the world, but there was no room in it to hold the memory of a wrong. So these words, coming from Lincoln himself, from his friend Leonard Swett, and from the great Ralph Waldo Emerson, help us understand how his kindness and the related traits could best be described with words. But the best way to visualize them is not with words, but by knowing Lincoln's deeds, what he actually did that demonstrated these traits among the many difficult people he had to deal with during his presidency, and with whom he always took the high road no matter what. First, toward his cabinet. Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, Team of Rivals, describes how Lincoln chose William Seward, Edward Bates, and Salmon Chase to be in his cabinet, even though each of them had been his opponents in pursuing the presidency in the 1860 election. Why did he pick his rivals to be in the cabinet? Because he believed that they would bring the greatest horsepower to his administration, which he knew he would need all the horsepower he could get to deal with the huge challenges coming at him from the moment of his inauguration in March 1861. At first, his team of rivals cabinet tried to undermine him, tried to circumvent him. Yet Lincoln turned the other cheek toward them and their initial hostility and disrespect. He maintained kindness, peace, dignity, and civility toward them, and earned their respect as in time they came around and recognized him as a great president under whom they were proud to serve. Next, Lincoln showed his kindness and its related traits toward the people in the southern states who had seceded from the Union after he won the 1860 election, before Lincoln took office 4 months later. Inaugurations in those days were in March, not January. So here were the magnanimous words he said to the seceding Southerners in his first inaugural address, who he believed had violated the Constitution by their attempt to break away from the country. And he said what he said, hoping that they would change their minds and come around and rejoin the Union. To those Southerners, quote, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union. When again touched as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature." Yes, Lincoln acted as a peacemaker and refused to show anger, resentment, or malice to those who he believed had violated the Constitution with their secession and were thereby attempting to destroy the Union. And he did it not by threatening them, but by appealing to their better angels. Next, when the war started, Lincoln showed kindness, dignity, and civility toward two of the Union Army's top generals who were badly underperforming. First, George McClellan, who led the Union Army early in the war. McClellan was narcissistically arrogant and often disparaged Lincoln's leadership. One evening in late 1861, during the war's first year, when things were not going well for the Union Army, Lincoln, his Secretary of State, William Seward, and his assistant, John Hay, went to McClellan's home to talk strategy, and they waited there over an hour before McClellan finally showed up. Although the general saw them in his living room, he immediately went upstairs and then had his servant come down and tell Lincoln that McClellan was just too tired to speak with him that night, and the president would have to wait until the next day to be able to speak with him. So as Lincoln and his colleagues walked back to the executive mansion that night, Seward and Hay were beside themselves over McClellan's rudeness and his refusal to talk urgent war business with the commander-in-chief in his home that night. Here was Lincoln's calm reaction to McClellan's insulting behavior. Quote, "It is better at this time not to be making points of etiquette and personal dignity." Next underperforming Northern general, George Gordon Meade, who led the Northern Army at the Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863. That bloody three-day battle gave the Union Army a much-needed victory. And when it ended, General Robert E. Lee's army fled from Pennsylvania and back to Virginia to cut their losses. Inexplicably, Meade did not pursue Lee into Virginia, and his fateful decision allowed the Confederates to live and fight another day. When Lincoln learned that Meade had allowed Lee's army to escape, he was beside himself, because if Meade had pursued and defeated Lee's army, it might well have ended the war. Lincoln sat down and wrote a strong, critical letter to Meade in which he said, quote, "Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am immeasurably distressed because of it," close quote. But then Lincoln slept on it, and the next day he wrote on the envelope, "Letter written, but not sent." Thus, he knew he did not want to alienate his top general at that time when the war's tide might well be turning. So Lincoln showed kindness, dignity, and civility, and did not show malice or plant a thorn in his weak generals' breasts, despite their glaring arrogance and incompetence that prevented the Union Army from winning the war in its first 2 years. Next, Lincoln showed kindness, dignity, and civility to Union soldiers who had been court-martialed during the war, usually for deserting their regiments. Here's what the pardon clerk in the U.S. Attorney General's office said, quote, "There was nothing harder for the president to do than put aside a prisoner's application, and he could not resist it when it was urged by a pleading wife and a weeping child." Lincoln's assistant, John Hayes, said, quote, "He was eager to pardon when he caught any fact that would justify him in saving the life of a condemned soldier." And here's what Lincoln said about his willingness to forgive court-martial soldiers, quote, "When I can find a good excuse for saving a man's life, I go to bed happy, as I think how joyous the signing of my name will make him, his family, and his friends." So to the soldiers who he led as commander-in-chief who had shirked their duties, Lincoln was kind and forgiving, not harsh or vindictive. Next, in showing his consistent kindness as a peacemaker, look what he said to the nation, North and South, as he started his second term in his second inaugural address when the war was in its final month, knowing surrender was imminent and the country would soon need to reconcile and again become United States, quote, "with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow, and for his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and a lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations," close quote. He gave that address after 750,000 lives had been lost and millions wounded, many with amputations, caused by a war that began with the Southern states' secession, with the Confederates firing the first shots at Fort Sumter, and yet he did not disparage the Southerners. Rather, he wanted to bind up their wounds and take care of their families. In his book, Lincoln and the Fight for Peace, John Avalon called these 74 words that begin with malice toward none the best sentence in the history of our democracy, because there is poetry and rhythm, but more than that, there is durable wisdom, pointing imperfect people toward a more perfect union. These words of grace from what has been called Lincoln's Sermon on the Mount were statements of magnanimous kindness, dignity, and civility, and were delivered in a level-headed mode of equanimity. Next, he showed kindness as a peacemaker by the peace terms he sought after the war ended. Here were his thoughts on how the Confederate soldiers should be treated once they surrendered. Let them all go. Officers and all, let them have their horses to plow with and their guns to shoot crows with. We want these people to return their allegiance and submit to the laws. Therefore, I say, give them the most liberal and honorable terms. This extraordinarily generous and forgiving attitude toward Confederate soldiers after the war demonstrates Lincoln's greatness of spirit toward all people. Finally, he showed kindness as a peacemaker with dignity and civility by the way he treated his very difficult wife, Mary, who was so out of control that her son Robert committed her to an insane asylum after Lincoln's death. Here's how a leading Lincoln biographer, Michael Burlingame, described Mary. She had an ungovernable temper and seemed to take a special delight in contradicting her husband and humiliating him on every occasion. Their marriage was a fountain of misery. Yet despite Mary's egregiously negative personality, Abraham Lincoln never took the bait. He stayed even-tempered, dignified, civil, and yes, kind toward her. The problems he dealt with of the Civil War were too vast for malicious dealings and getting bogged down in quarrels with an obnoxious spouse. So I hope you now understand, based on how Lincoln dealt with his team of rivals cabinet, with seceding Southerners before the Civil War began, with arrogant and incompetent generals and court-martial soldiers during the war, with the American people, North and South, and Confederate soldiers as the war was ending, and with his temperamental wife, that he epitomized kindness and was a peacemaker with dignity and civility and stayed in a mode of magnanimity coupled with equanimity at all times with all people, no matter what. In life, regardless of how challenging it gets, and it doesn't get any more challenging than being President of the United States and Commander-in-Chief in a war that causes constant fatalities. But in all of our lives, Lincoln and all of us, these traits should not be a sometime trait, but an all-the-time trait. So for all of us here at this important conference on religious freedom, peacemaking, and human flourishing, as we reflect on who we are and who we want to be, let's start showing more kindness, dignity, and civility toward those who cross our paths. And let's be peacemakers like Abraham Lincoln. No matter what other people say or do to provoke us, let's take the high road when insults and punches get thrown at us. Let's turn the other cheek and not take the bait from our adversaries. Let's stay level-headed and not waste time with petty quarrels. Let's do nothing in malice and plant no thorns on any person. And then let's see how much better our lives will be once we've made the decision to achieve those goals. Let's be able to apply Tolstoy's words about Lincoln to ourselves, as with God's help we strive to have greatness of character, deep feelings, and moral power as shown by our kindness, dignity, civility, magnanimity, equanimity, and peacemaking. May this be the commitment that each of us makes today, June 17, 2025, in Provo, Utah, when our world needs people with these virtues, people like us, now more than ever. Thank you.
What a tremendous panel. Thank you so very much for taking the time to be here, to be thoughtful about the remarks, to give us really food for thought that we should take with us and turn into action. And now to close our conference, Dr. Elizabeth Clark.
I realize that I'm the only person standing between you and dinner. So I'll make 2 brief housekeeping moments and 1 or 2 minutes of comments. I'm not sure what more we can say than the powerful examples and messages we've heard today. First, for the housekeeping. This is a gift from us. There's some outside the table. It's a brochure about knowing your rights in the United States on freedom of religion. Been vetted by a number of specialist lawyers, and other groups have signed on. A second housekeeping item is we'd appreciate it if after this, the speakers and the IAC would join us on the stairs down that way for a group photo. And I couldn't end without saying thank you to all the amazing people who made today possible. I can't mention them all by name, but I want to thank the Wheatley Institute. I want to thank the people here at conferences and workshops, our incredible media team that makes us look good. An impossible job, I know, but and to thank our student team, our law students, our students visiting from BYU Hawaii that have been volunteering, our speakers, Sherry Rogdi, my sister, who has run this whole conference, and all of you for coming. So please join me in thanking the people who've made such a difference. I get asked a lot of time, why are you protecting religious freedom? Are you just trying to impose your beliefs on others? Or sometimes that part goes unsaid if the people are trying to be polite. Don't we have religious freedom? Is it important? Do we care? Why should religious believers get special privileges? You've probably heard some of these kinds of statements too. I think today we've heard, and part of what I was hoping with this conference is to bring to the fore reasons that we can articulate and show people why religious freedom matters to us, why there are reasons for people of faith and people of no faith to support religious freedom. I think there are many, many reasons, but one of the easiest is what we've seen and heard about the impact of religion on individuals and families and communities, this idea of building peace and human flourishing. There's more, there's how religion passes on values, how religious organizations help build social capital. There's how we heard now that how religious organizations can contribute to peace. There's an enormous set of reasons why we as a group should value religious freedom, even if we didn't believe. But I've also seen firsthand people who are persecuted because of their beliefs. And I've seen this here in the United States, but probably most dramatically for me has been my work in Central and Eastern Europe. I've spent the last 25 years working in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And I see faithful people who want to contribute to their communities, who want to build a drug rehabilitation center, who want to be kind to their neighbors, but they are thrown in prison. They're blacklisted from higher education or from jobs. Minority groups are told that they're not real citizens of their country. People who are forced to worship in secret. Generations or more of monks, priests, imams, rabbis who are killed or thrown in prison, and leaving later generations scrambling, trying to find their faith again. My favorite story is that when I was in Kyiv, oh goodness, just a few years after the Soviet Union fell, and I was at a conference, and there was this short man with a long beard, and he was just the happiest man I'd ever seen. And he was talking about his experience, and he said, well, you know, my father was a preacher, and he got thrown in jail. And then, you know, my brother became a preacher, and he got thrown in jail. And I decided, well, this is a family tradition. I became a preacher and got thrown in jail. People are willing to sacrifice for their beliefs because it has transcendent power. Because even above and beyond the things it does to our communities are the things it does to us, the way it changes us and leads us to reach out with love and kindness, to build communities of caring, to build a beloved community. There's so much one could say. I'm going to finish with the words of an atheist, actually. Alain de Botton talks about religion. He says religion has an ability to meet central needs that secular society cannot solve with any particular skill. He mentions the need to live together in communities in harmony, despite our deeply rooted selfish and violent impulses. And second, the need to cope with terrifying degrees of pain, which arise from our vulnerability to professional failure, troubled relationships, death of loved ones, and to our decay and demise. But I love this part most. He said, religion's relevance to the problems of community are arguably never greater than when they depart from the modern political script and remind us that there is also value to be had in standing in a hall with 100 acquaintances and singing a hymn together, or in ceremoniously washing a stranger's feet, or in sitting at a table with neighbors and partaking of lamb stew and conversation. The kinds of rituals which, as much as the deliberations inside parliaments and law courts, are what help to fold our fractious and fragile societies together. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being part of this. May we all be able to live our beliefs in a way that brings peace and flourishing to ourselves and others. May we be advocates for religious freedom and dignity for everyone everywhere. May you bring others with you. Thank you.